Hey guys, welcome to week six, associations and validations. So, so far we have learned a lot of stuff, right? So we started out with learning Ruby, and then we came to models, then we came to controllers, views. Then the last week you just learned Bootstrap as well. So you know how to beautify your stuff. But then there is a lot more left, right? Like you must have still wondered, a final use of a web application is the functionality it provides. Until now, you have done many assignments in which you have written some working code in which there are models. But then haven't you thought like there must be something more to models? As in, there must be some kind of association, there must be some kind of relationship between models, right? So in web development can easily be correlated with life in general. As in anything programming can be correlated, right? So in life, like we have relationships, we have like how you have relationship with your parents and all that. Same thing can be used here as well, right? Any real life example you take, for example, you have a book. So book is always written by an author, right? So book always has an author. You can never find a book that does not have an author, right? So if you are making an e-commerce company, then obviously you need to stock products and then you need to make a model such that every item has its author or has its producer or has its manufacturer, right? So this is a simple association. There is an association between the book and the author, right? So this is what is called an association. So in this week, we'll be diving deep into this association because usually for a bigger scale, as if if you make a website that is of a higher scale, then there will be a lot of associations among the models. Each model will be related to each other. So it is definitely a very important topic to be known. So we'll be going through associations and then we'll be going through something called validation. So validation must be something you guys must have come across throughout till now, right? So suppose you go to some website where they ask you to fill your email address. Now, if you don't fill your email address, your request won't be sent. As in you won't be able to submit the form itself, right? Sometimes in the front end it just comes that enter an email address. Or sometimes the request goes, but then you never know if it went or not. Or sometimes you just get a warning saying, please enter proper email address. And this is not just email address, it could be for anything. Suppose they ask you a CGP and you enter something more than 10. It's not possible, right? So there is always a validation kept, a check kept so that you enter only the right number or the right amount. Now that is called validation. It can be number, it can be amount, it can be anything. So we'll talk about all that. So that is called validation. Now, for a web application to work, there should be both associations and validations. And validations could be either front end or back end or both. We'll talk about how one is more useful than the other and all that throughout the session. So now let's just deep dive into what are associations, right? So now, before we get into associations, I'd like to revise a few basic concepts about models. How in a relational database like MySQL or SQLite, we store information as a set of tables, right? And every row has some information, and the columns are the attributes. Now, if we can identify a row using a single column, for example, I can identify myself with my email ID, right? So, what does the email ID become? The email ID becomes my identifier. So, we can call the email ID a primary key because my email ID is unique for me, right? I can't have two people with the same email ID, but then I can have two people being born on the same day. I can have two people who share the same day, but I can't have two people who share the same email ID, right? So email ID becomes the primary key. So for example, in a users table, we can uniquely identify each row by the email ID, but not the name. So yeah, by default, Rails generates something called a column ID, which is you automatically incremented for each record and is unique and is used as the primary key. Now there is something called a foreign key which you can like Google about. So foreign key is also as important, excuse me, uh, as the primary key. As in you need like you can make relations using foreign key. So we'll come back to all that. So now active record. So right now you must have used active record in your for assignments, right? So what is an active record? An active record is actually a high-level API for interacting with the database that is provided by Rails, which allows you to do some database operations using a simple and intuitive syntax. For example, if I want to select all the posts, suppose from the model called post, if I had to write a SQL query, it would be something like this. It would be something like select star from books. This would be my SQL query for selecting books. Okay, so now this can include this can get complex very soon. Suppose I need all the books which start with A. So where something 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 there could be any condition, right? So anything could come in any of these places. So now that is why writing SQL queries becomes very complex, and it's also not secure. So that is why Rails provides us something called active record. So you can write active record queries which get translated into SQL query while compiling or while the call is made. So active record provides so not just this, Active Record also provides built-in support for validation. It provides support for association. It provides support for migration. There are a lot more benefits to Active Record, and it helps a lot, right? Every code you write in Rails will use Active Record, especially if you write a code in controller or the model. It is definitely going to use Active Record. So yeah, be thorough with Active Record, and yeah. So let's just move forward. So like I said, a SQL query becomes too huge, and because of that, we use Active Records. And now let's go to associations. Like I said, association, like I said, in even in real life, you have relationships and associations, right? Like you can have only one set of parents, right? But then your parents can have more than one children. So that's always there. So those kind of relationships are called associations, and they are of different use cases. Now they can be of belong to. It can have has one. It can be has many. It can be has many through. It can be has one through. It can be has. It can be belongs to. It can be belongs to many. All these are different types of associations. Now you don't have to worry about all these. There are the main ones are basically. So before we talk into Rails associations, right? Let's talk about association in general. Like in general, for a database, when you go to your higher semesters, you will learn something called database management system. So in your course, so database management system basically throughout the course you will learn about databases, and it's very important to know about databases because as a web developer you need to know what goes on behind the scene, right? So now in general, for a database, the following are the associations. One-to-one association. This type of association is used when one object is related to exactly one other object. For example, a user may have only one profile, right? So a user and a profile are two different entities. As in, a profile can have a lot of details, a user can have a lot of details. But then a user can have only one profile, right? So every profile is linked to one user. As in, one profile is linked to one user. So it's a one-to-one association, right? Now, what could be a one-to-many association? Just think about it. Just pause the video and think about it. Number one, hopefully you thought about it. One to many, right? So one thing points to many things. What could it be? Like I said, the example of a book and an author. So an author can be one, but then he can write a lot of books. But then a book can have what? A single author, right? So that same thing. If you have a blogging website, then a user may have many blogs, but then a blog is written by a single user, right? So this type of association is when one object is related to multiple other objects. That's called one-to-many association. Now, what about a many-to-many association? A many-to-many association, this type of association is used when the multiple objects are related to multiple objects. Okay, so suppose we have a post with tag. Like if you go to Medium, this is a very popular blogging platform. So you have like tags associated with the article, right? So an article can have more than one tag. A tag can have more than one article related to it because you can reverse search through the tags, right? Suppose I have a tag called India. So I can search through the tag India and I'll get a lot of articles. Similarly, an article cannot just have India as its tag. It can have adventure as its tag. It can have hiking as its tag. It can have anything as its tag, right? So that is what? That's a many-to-many relationship. Now there is polymorphic association, which is when one object belongs to multiple other objects, each with a different type. Now, for example, a user may have a profile and a post, both of which are related to the same user, right? Like both the profile and the post are related to the same user. So you can think of it as in terms of OOPS. So if you have learned OOPS, you must know what is polymorphic inheritance and all that. So it's kind of related to that. Now, what about self-referential association? So this type of association is used when an object is related to itself, as in it's related to itself, right? So that's what is a self-reference association. Now I'll just explain in Rails what are the three main type of associations. So in Rails, the first very important type of association is called belongs to. A belongs to association indicates that the model cannot exist without the other model. So, as in our blogging application, right? So, suppose you're making a blogging application, an article cannot exist without an user, right? As in, a user has to make an article. An article can't be made out of thin air, right? So, then belongs to association is used. Why? Because for every article, there is one user who has written the article. The user can have many articles written. So, it represents a, but then an article cannot exist without a user, right? So suppose in our case, let's just say that every article belongs to one user. So that is the belongs to method. Now, what about the has one method? A has one association indicates that the model has one instance of the other model. So this is also one is to one relationship. For example, a web application and user profile, like I was saying. Suppose there is something called a user model and there is something called a profile model. Now, every user can have only one profile, right? But then every profile can also have only one user. So each of these has one, right? So you can use has one and belongs to here interchangeably, as in a user can have one profile, a profile belongs to the user, right? You understood, right? So that is how is the use case of has one. Now with this association, this is how you will be able to access stuff. So I'll be showing you in demo, so don't worry about that. Now what about a has many? So a has many association indicates that the model has many instances of the other model, as in like books and posts, right? So user and posts, a user can make tons of posts, but then a post belongs to a single user, right? So that is what is the has many relationship. So if in the user we'll write has many posts. It's just English, guys. Let's just think about it. It's just plain English. What you think you just write, as in user has many. What of many does it have? It has posts, and every post belongs to user, right? Because there is a single user to whom every post belongs to. So that is what the has many thing. Now just go through the just read through it when you guys have time. So now let's just go to let's just jump to code right now. So yeah, so let's just start from scratch. You guys can pick up with me. I mean, you guys can do it with me. So Rails new demo. So this is how you make a new Rails app in case you didn't know. So let it just make the new app. As in, it will now slowly create every file we need. It is going to install all the gems one by one. It's going to install everything. So it is going to take a little bit of time, but then hopefully, yep. So it has installed everything properly. So now let's just go to CD demo. So as you can see, I'll just open up the Windows VS Code terminal. So these things don't exist right now. Yeah, so right now, this is our app, right? So our app right now is completely new. As in everything in this app is new. There is nothing in the app, right? And how do you start the app? If you remember, Rails S minus P 3000. So yeah, so it has started. So if you want, I can go and open it. So localhost 3000 should start the app. Yeah, so Ruby on Rails. So this basically shows that our Ruby on Rails app has started. So now let's do one thing. Now comes the interesting part. So right now, if you have picked up with me, as in if you have picked up till the assignments, you know there is something called scaffolding, right? And scaffolding basically generates all the code for you. So right now, let's assume we want to make a user and a post, as in we just want to make a blogging website. Or let's just take the example of a library. So a library can have a book and an author, right? So let's keep it simple. We have one book, we have a book model, and we have an author model. So let's just make scaffolding for both. So Rails G scaffold books. And this books is gonna be the for one model, right? And what is its? It has name, title, and when is the book published at, right? So these are the things, and published at an integer. So these are the things that will be there in the scaffold. So let's just run the scaffold. Yeah. So scaffold has been run. So how do you know if your scaffold has been run? If you go here, sorry, yeah, if you go here and if you go to DB, or no, if you go to app, if you go to model, book.rb should have come. That basically means that our book has gotten generated, right? So that's what book.rb does. Now let's go to, let us now make one more, which is basically your author. So let's see scaffold author, name, email. That's it. An author has just a name and email. That's it. You don't have to complicate it too much. So let's just do this also. So now, how do you check if it came? Yeah, author.rb came. So right now, if you can see, all these are empty. Okay. So there is no relationship at all right now. Like the all the has one, many one, belongs to, all that we talked till now. None of those things we have written in code, right? So just keep that in mind that we have not written any of what we have talked till now in code. So before we start off, we'll have to migrate the DB, right? So Rails DB migrate. So Rails DB migrate should migrate. Now, if you just go and see the status, yeah. So if you see, both the migrations are done, which means we have created books, we have created authors. There is an easy way to check this if it has been happened or not. If it has happened or not, you just go to bin DB, sorry, and you go to migrate. You see that two migrations are done. Create books is done and create authors is done. Now let's talk a little bit logic. So if you have no if you think about it, book, right? So book can have one author, right? But then an author can be an author of several books, right? So that is something that you have to think about. So a book, right? So a book can have one author. So every book can have what? One author, right? But then an author can belong to a lot of books. So don't you think it's wiser to carry a copy of the author in the book, right? So basically, if we have the book model, which right now has name, has title, has published at. Isn't it wiser if I just carry a reference to the book as well? No, sorry, to the author as well, right? Because every book has an author, right? So, but then every author, an author can have several books in. As in, an author can write several books, right? So it's always wiser to carry the author's ID in the book rather than the book's ID in the author. Because an author can be an author to many books. So it's not wise to carry that, right? But then at the same time, since a single book can be authored by a single author, it's always better to carry the author alone, right? So now, how do I tell Rails that I need to carry a reference of author in my book, right? That is very important. You need to tell Rails that your author is serving as a foreign key. So this is what is a foreign key, right? So using foreign key, it gives you a reference to another table. So right now here, author is the other table, and your foreign key will just give you a reference to author table from the book table. So now how do you write the foreign key? So here, just write t dot integer author ID. So just see how there is a semi this thing colon, and then there is author ID, and then FOREIGN. So the spelling, just make sure of the spelling because it's all. So yeah, foreign key true. So FOREIGN key true. So now the thing is, you have to roll back the migrations because all the migrations that have happened till now should be rolled back because we are now going to make new migrations. So DB migrate, DB roll back. So every time you put DB rollback, it is going to roll back the most recent one. So if you go to the status again, you'll see one is down, right? So the authors is down. You need to down the books as well because our main change is in the book, right? So our main change is in the book. So yeah, so I down both. So if you see, it has down both. Now again, Rails DB. Like, so this should migrate status. Both should be up and running. Really cool. So now we have our migrations done properly. It is done very properly. There is no problem. Now, I'll start the Rails console because right now I like working with the Rails console rather than just opening some views and stuff because it's always better to use the console because you get a lot of information through the console. So now in the console, if you type, see, you get all the recommendations as well. So suppose I type book. So let's leave book, uh, author, author.new, book.new. So if you see author.new, book.new, etc., you will find their this thing, their model, right? So author model has an ID, has a name, has an email. So right now let's create a new author. So how do you do that? You'll say author.create, create name, hi, email, hello@gmail.com. So you just click enter. So now you can see that a transaction has been done. And now if you see author.all should load you the author that you have just created. Let's create one more author. So let's change his name to hello. Tom. Let's change its name to Tom. And his email is tom@gmail.com. So now if you go author.all, you will find that there are two authors, right? Why did I create an author? If you think about it. First, why didn't I create a book? Because in the migration, we have clearly said that there needs to be an author ID. So without an author ID, we can't create it, right? So we need an author ID to create a book. So now let us just do it once more. Book.new. Okay, so book dot create. What all things do I need? I need a name, Harry Potter, title, Prince, published at, spelling is right. Yep, 2022, and author ID 1. So if I do this, you can see book.all should give me all the books. Book.first should give me the first book. Now comes a very important part. Can I do this? Yep, I can do this, right? Why am I able to do this? Book.first.author ID. Why does it work? So your book.first.author ID, it works because there is a reference to author ID, right? Like if you can see here, there is a reference to the author ID here. But then I have missed out something very important. I have not specified the relationships here. So without one relation, so suppose I author. So let's go to author.all. So there are two authors, right? And book.all, there is one book. Now, can I reference author.first.book? Why does it not work? Right. Because I am able to reference author ID from the book. But then why am I not able to reference the book from the author ID? Right. So that is very simple. Why? So what am I'm able to do? What I'm able to do is using the book, I'm able to get the author ID of the book. Why? Because in the migration, I've clearly mentioned that there needs to be a foreign key through which points to the author ID. And even when creating all the books, I have given the author ID as a argument, right? So now the database right now knows that author ID is a foreign key which you can reference. But then the reverse it doesn't know. It doesn't know that you can call books through through the author and all that. So how do you let this thing know? It's very simple. You need to write what kind of relationship both the things have. So author has many books, right? Very simple. Author has many books, and very important. Note how I have written a plural books. And book has what? Book has what? Book belongs to a author, right? So book belongs to author, whereas author has many books. So this is the very simple relationship. Nothing complicated in this relationship. Now I need to reload it. I need to reload the console. Now I'll tell you author.first books. Yes, got it. So now author.first.books works, but it did not work earlier, right? So here, if you see author.first.books, here it did not work. Here it worked. Why did it work? Because here I've given it the reference, right? Like here I have given it that it has many books. So right now our Rails knows that there is going to be a relationship. So it is able to give you the things. So this is how you define a simple relationship. As in, this is the most simple relation you can find. Now there are a lot of things that you can do. Now suppose I delete a book. It won't, if I delete an author, it won't delete the books associated with the author. You need to write an extra line of code. Now this is going to be an assignment that, not an assignment, something that you have to find out for yourself. I can give you a small clue. It has something to do with destroy and cascade. So yeah, so just go through Google or go through any source you know. Just find out what if you write here. Here you have to write something, so that if you delete one author, all the books associated with the author also gets deleted. See, if I put author dot first dot destroy, which should destroy the first author, books dot all, sorry, book dot all still has the book with the author ID 1, whereas it should not, right? Because it doesn't make sense. But then it still has. So book dot first dot destroy. Yeah, it still does, right? That is because you haven't mentioned something. So just go through what has to be mentioned and you'll be able to find it. It's very simple. It's just another relationship. As in you need to just write what is the relationship and all that. Now this is kind of what associations are, as in what I wanted to talk about association was this. Now let's just go through the guide.ruby on Rails thing for the association. So they've used the same structure as in author and book. Now they have talked about the same thing, as in what the different type of associations do. This belongs to association. This has one, has many through, has one through, has and belongs to many. All these associations are there, right? So now belongs to association. They've mentioned it with a very good, neat diagram. I've done the same thing. I've done the same example from this website. So you'll have more clarity if you go through the website right now, because then you'll have like belongs to author. Book what? Like what did we type here? Book belongs to author. An author has many books. And you need to know something that is very interesting is that you're gonna put books here, not book. That is very important. Has many, it's books here. Okay. So keep that in mind. Then they do the same thing. That is the migration part. As in, they tell you how you need to specify the foreign key to be true for the migration. And they have like specified some has many relationships as well. So it's one each relation. If you can understand one relation, it's easier to understand all the relations. It's not that hard. And you need to understand relations though. Relations are very important. So yeah. So now let's go back to our blog. So we have finished the first part, which is the association part. Now you must have been feeling tired already, as in it's already 27 minutes and we are still in associations. But then, guys, it's very important to know what the associations do. So do go through all the active records. Now let's talk about validation. So why do you need validation, right? So why can't I just make do without any validation? So the problem with this is your user who is going to use your website is going to not follow the rules. That's how you can assume. And that's how it works 90% of the time. If you ask your user to type in the email, he might leave a space between at and the email address. For example, he might say alice at the rate space gmail.com. Now, it's not a valid email ID, right? He unknowingly put a space, or he or she unknowingly put a space. But then it's our duty to make sure that there is no error in what the user is typing. Why? Because later on it can lead to more problems. Now, suppose you accepted his email ID, no problems. You accepted Alice at the rate some space gmail.com. But now Alice wants to reset her password. Now she clicks on reset password. Though from the database, her email ID is fetched, which is alice at the rate space gmail.com. Now you are unable to send a reset token to her email. Why? Because the email is not valid, right? So all this happened because you accepted her email in the first place. And all this could have been stopped if you had just validated the email in the first place, right? Now, what kind of validations are there? They can be front-end validation, as in only client side. As in when Alice tries to click the submit button, it first checks it on her browser if all the form entities are correct or not. Then it sends the request to the server. So now what is the use of this? This is very fast and it doesn't need any intervention from the server. Right? Everything is done on the front end. But then at the same time, if everything is done on the front end, don't you think it's very unsafe? Anyone can tinker with the front end, right? If someone knows to code something, he or she can easily tinker the front end and they can bypass the front end validation. So on a security level, it's very bad. That's why we need a backend validation, wherein once the request is made, you'll then validate whether all the form elements were true, are proper, and only then will you make an entry in the database. So before you make an entry in the database, you will check everything, and only then will you make the entry in the database. So that is the server side validation, and it's always better to have both client side and server side. Client side because it's fast, server side because it's reliable, and because you need server side validation. Like you can't just allow any person to make any entry in your database, right? You don't want that to happen. Like I don't want any person to make like junk entries in my database. I want only proper entries in my database, which is why you need server side validation and you need both client side validation. Now, what are the different types of popular validations, right? So right now, from my talking, you must have realized email, that's a really popular validation because every email has to be validated and it's easy to validate. because it's basically at followed by a email followed by some website name .com. So that's usually how emails are .co.in or .edu. So there are many things, but then it's all easy to verify. So that is one validation, which is email. Next, there is the validation of presence equal to true. Like some fields need to be true, right? Like for instance, when you were coming to college, when you used Iris for the first time, then you had to enter your biodata, right? Now in the biodata, every field was compulsory because you cannot skip any field in your biodata because later on you need your biodata for more purposes, right? For placements, then for degree, for generation of the certificates, all that you need your biodata to be proper. Because of which presence true becomes important. So presence true. So we validate on both front end and back end so that there is no way possible for a person to make an entry unless all the fields are full. So presence true, it's a very important and popular validation. Next, we have numericality. Suppose I ask you to fill your CGPA. Can it be more than 10? No, it can't. And can it go in negative? No, it can't. It's definitely a number that lies between 0 and 10. Doesn't matter where the number is, it's going to lie between 0 and 10, right? So numericality, as in you can say whether it should be only an integer. Can a CGPA be just an integer? No, CGPA can be a decimal as well. So you can't restrict CGPA to an integer. But then it's a decimal between 0 and 10 inclusive. So you can give that validation to it. Greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. Right. Then you have phone numbers. Phone numbers can have a minimum and maximum length. Pin code. Pin code can have a minimum and maximum length. The pin code has a fixed length of 6, right? In India. In India, it has a fixed length. Then abroad, it could be different. So now you can fix what can be the minimum and what can be the maximum. That is the length validation. Next, we have the format validation. Like email is a format validation, right? Although email has its own separate validation because it's so important, the other things like you can suppose you have some weird format in your form, then you need to validate that, right? Suppose you need a form, you are saying that some field that you're taking has a hash followed by a number for sure. Now you need to validate that. Then you can use something called regex, which is a regular expression. You can generate a regular expression and then you can validate that with the format. Now the good thing about Rails validation is that you can add a message also as an error is to when you don't suppose you fail the validation. Obviously, the user needs to know, right, that they failed the validation. Else, what's the point of having the validation? Because the user needs to know whether the validation has failed or not. So because of that, we have error messages for validation as well. So those things are also there. So you can send a message and all that. Now you can create custom validations as well. You need not stick to just the validations provided by Rails. At times you need custom validation. Like for instance, suppose I upload an image. The image maximum size is 2 MB. So I can write a validator for 2 MB. Suppose it can take only a PNG. So I can write a validator for PNG. Right. So all these things can be done if I know how to code. So that is why it's very important to know how things work behind the scenes. Now let's go to some general things like how save function and save exclamation are different. Now the functions that end with exclamation are called unsafe functions, and they raise an exception if the record is not valid. On the other hand, functions not ending are called safe, and they just return true or false. They don't raise an exception. Thus, you must use the return value for control flow like create action. Like here, how you can't use not you can't use the exclamation symbol here because exclamation symbol does not return a true or false. It returns an exception if there is an exception. Understood, right? So yeah. Then you have things like valid. You have things like valid, which lets you do the validation check once again. And suppose if something is not valid, say, you need to check whether it's valid before you create the entry itself. You can check it during the entry creation, but then suppose you are so keen to check it before the entry creation. At that time, you can just use dot valid, and then you can display the errors by dot errors dot full messages. Then you can reserve you display an error. So in the console this gets displayed properly, but then if you want but then obviously your end user won't be using your console, right? For an end user, convenience is the most important thing. So for the end user, you need to display the messages properly, right? So that is when you can use something called errors.full messages, and then you can write this neat code which lets the errors be displayed. Let's see, errors are linked to a model. Suppose I have the book model, and I'm saying that I need to validate its name to be caps lock. So now suppose it's not capital, then the error is associated with the book object right now. So you can just go through the book object, you can see if there are any errors, And if there are any errors, you understood. This is the reason why your book is not getting saved. So you can show that to the front end as well. That is the good. That is how everything in Rails is linked with each other. As in, you need Rails takes care of a lot of things on its own. Like validation and association is one big thing that it does on its own. Like if you have used other frameworks, then you'll come to realize how good Rails does it on its own. As in, it has so many helper functions. So in relationships, there are something called helper functions. We use helper functions actually. So in the console, so when we went to the console, right? So we used books.first.author, right? So how did books.first.author even work? How did Rails realize that books.first is like books.first.author should give you author ID, should give you the author ID of the first book, right? So that all worked because it has a helper function. So like article.create, user.articles.create, user.destroy. So all these are working because it's all defined in the active record, right? So yeah, so that's it about validations and associations. Validations is a even easier part because I'll just write a very simple validation for you guys. So suppose we have the author, right? So we can write validates. So author has the email, right? So validates email uniqueness. Yes. True. Now this will actually validate the uniqueness. So suppose I want to try it out. So I need to make two entries actually. So author dot create author dot all author dot create Jerry email Tom at the rate gmail.com. Suppose I do this. So now I go back to author dot all. Okay, so basically I haven't reloaded it. So author dot create name Tom and Jerry email Tom at the rate gmail.com. Yeah. So if you see, it did not create it, right? Because why? Because Tom at gmail.com was already used. So earlier I had not reloaded the console. So that's why these effects didn't take place. So when I reloaded the console and when I just tried to make it again, right? So when I tried to create the author using the same email ID, Tom at gmail.com, it just doesn't work. So suppose I create it again. Suppose I change the name to Tom ASDSJ, Tom at gmail.com. Let's see if it works. It still didn't get created, right? It won't get created. Why? Because you have told that it needs to be unique. So it cannot just get created at all. So now suppose I change its now see it got created, right? Why? Because right now it changed the email. So that's how the validation works, right? So validate email uniqueness is equal to true. It worked because the email was unique. If it was not unique, it wouldn't have worked. So yeah, that's how you use validation in a nutshell. So just go through all these resources very well. They are very useful. So they are very in depth. Whatever is there in guides on Ruby on Rails is very, very in depth. Yeah, meet you next week, guys. Bye. Thank you for listening till now. If you were listening, bye, guys.